All right. Hey, what's up? Welcome to another live stream. Hopefully, we got all of the bugs out when it comes to the live stream, and we'll be able to get a good session in today. So I'm not going to waste any time. We're just going to jump right into the photo. And here we are inside of ON1 Photo RAW 2023. Now, what I will mention, if at any point you're like, you know what, I really want to go get that software, you can save 20% by using Freewell Photos 20 at checkout. Now, this is an image that I took over a photo walk a few months back. So this isn't like a recent one, but I said, you know what, I really like the image here, the quality of the image. I shot this with the EOS R6 and my 35 millimeter macro, or I guess it's not really a macro, but the RF 35 millimeter lens. Really, really cool lens, and I enjoy using it. So that's what we have here for the image. Now, the first thing that I do in any of my workflows is really just figure out which camera profile do I want to edit in. And by clicking on it and then hitting the down arrow on my keyboard, I can kind of cycle through these and find the one that really speaks to me. Now, I personally like dark and contrasty images, so I'm going to shoot for something that is probably a little darker and more contrasty, but you know, this is personal preference. This isn't like something that you have to do. It's just what I like to do. Now, the camera profiles for the R6 that are included with ON1 Photo RAW, those are a little saturated. So I think I'm going to stick with the ON1 profiles here. And I guess I didn't come down here to linear RAW, which I'm not a fan of. That's very flat. I think that those have a use case, but for this image, no need for it. I am liking ON1 Vivid, and I also like ON1 Landscape. And standard is just a little too flat for me. So I think between Landscape and Vivid, I like the contrast that I get on the leaves with the landscape. So I'm going to go with that. So there we go. I don't know why I didn't select it. I hit enter and then it just didn't want to select. So now that I have my profile, what I like to do is hit AI Auto. And this just gives me an idea, right? Except for this time, it did not give me an idea. AI Auto over processed the image. So even if I were to pull this back, I still would not go in that direction with the image. Then I try AI match just to see what ON1 thinks the camera saw. And I have this down. So let me just pull that back up. And that's a little bit better. Here's before and after. I can kind of work with this, but I'm not sure AI match is getting it either. So this is where you go into your manual processing and you start to work on that. So I'm going to click on levels, and what I'm noticing is I don't have a lot of highlight information, which is fine because all of this is in shadow, and I'm actually pretty cool with that. Because I want a darker contrasted image. That's my style. But let me just see what I can do, and I'll pull up on the whites just a little bit. And what I'm looking for is anything that's blowing out. So by holding the J key, if I pull this all the way up, I should start to see those red indicators right here on the inside of this plant leaf. But as I pull this back, now I'm starting to get less, or really I have no clipping highlights, which is good. I'm still holding down the J key, and I'm going to pull up on my highlights just to see where my range is on those, which looks like I have a lot of latitude. And this is a raw file, hence the reason I was able to change the camera profile. So that's always good. Now, I think, let me see, before, after, I think that's like that really bright, as bright as I really want that to get. So now I'll mess around with the structure just a little bit, see what I can do here. That gets it way too crunchy, so I'm not going to mess with that. I think maybe a +8 for this image works pretty well. Forgot to mess around with my shadows just to see how many or how dark I can get my shadows without losing too much detail in the image, right? Because I'm not worried about this background over here. And in fact, when I put the vignette on this, because I do plan to vignette this, this is not even really going to be in focus. The light obviously was coming from this direction, so I'm going to enhance that also in post. So we'll see. And we'll go with a little bit of contrast. Now, I like how this desaturated the image, but I kind of enjoyed the saturation that was in there before. So if I double click this and just bring the saturation back to the original image, and then I'll just pull up on the vibrant slider here. Now, mind you, ON1 decided to remove the saturation from the image when I clicked on AI Auto. That's something that doesn't reset when you click on manual. So food for thought, something to be aware of. If you have a photo and you're like, man, the saturation just isn't right, or the vibrance just isn't right, you may want to come and check down in this area. Same thing with the white balance. But for this image, let me go back to as shot. And it doesn't look like it moved too much from there. And if I start moving that over to the right, it just gets weird. I actually prefer this to be a little bit more blue, maybe not that blue. So we'll leave it around there, and I think that's perfectly fine. So now it's time to start enhancing the image a little bit more. So this is the flat out of camera raw version of the image. And now we're going to enhance the image. So what I like to do at this point is work through presets. Now, if I had bad exposure, I actually have an exposure preset pack that I use. I created this myself, and if that's something you're interested in, leave a comment down below and I'll be more than happy to share that with you. But essentially, all it's doing is giving me a look at if I wanted to go half a stop underexposed or if I wanted to go half a stop overexposed. And you can see they're right next to each other. So if there's an image that it's like, is it over or under exposed? I can look here really quickly and say or see which how much exposure I need to apply to an image. Now, I use this more as a utility than an actual preset or plugin, but just another way of getting the images the way that you want them to be in post-production. So if that's something you're interested in, just leave a comment down below and I will be more than happy to go over that. But for this image, I think I'm going to go with a minimalist look because I think these are cool, right? ON1 gives us some really good presets, and I want to be a good steward of using those as best I can, if I can. So let's see, which preset do I want to go with today? I think that's a little too desaturated. I want something with more of the green punch. I like what this is doing to the background, sort of, not like it how it's making it darker. But actually, I really like this one. This is kind of like modern hipster. So by clicking on this, now if I come back over to develop, I need to make sure. Okay, very good. So the presets and all of the presets that I make, by the way, will not affect your develop settings. Instead, everything is inside of the effects module. Now, as you can see with this one, there's only two effects in here, a bleach bypass and a tone enhancer. Now, I like to dissect these a little bit, and I really like what this bleach bypass is doing. Looks like the tone enhancer, it's probably down here. Yeah. So they're using the curves module down here to get this faded look But we'll start with the bleach bypass because I want to get the build up properly. Okay. So looking at the information here inside of the bleach bypass, if I turn this off and turn it back on, I think what you will notice is it starts to make the brightest areas bright and the darker areas dark. Well, I don't want that much brightness. All right. So I'm just going to pull back on the brightness. Now, what I do want is more of that darkening effect, right? I want a really edgy look here. That's what I'm going for. I want a really edgy look. So I'm going to pull up on the amount, and I will pull back on the detail just a little bit because I don't want this to, I mean, it's a leaf, right? I don't want the leaf to be this super crunchy leaf, even though we're getting close to fall. And then I'll pull up on the contrast a little bit because I really do like that separation. And then I'll even pull up on the saturation a little bit more. And we'll go before and after. Yeah. So you see I'm starting to get that green look in there. And what I'm losing is some of that green saturation. So again, this is why I like working with presets. I don't have to think things over too much. So next thing I'm going to do is grab my color adjustment. Now notice I haven't used any of the new features inside of ON1. So if you're following along with this and you're like, you know, what can I do in ON1? This is what you can do. Because everything that I'm using so far is inside of ON1 minus those exposure presets that I was showing you earlier. But that's, again, neither here nor there. So what I'm going to do is take my greens and I am going to saturate them. And you see how I'm just bringing a little bit more life back into this image. And then I'll go over to my yellows and I'll even push those over more into the green. That's really just affecting these areas right here. And if I saturate it a little bit more, hopefully, maybe that doesn't work out so well. And this is the beauty of photo editing, in my opinion. You get to do the trial and error phase. Like, does something actually work? So maybe if I bring the brightness down in that area, we'll pull up on the greens just a little bit. We'll come back over here to our greens and we'll change the hue of the greens just a touch towards the yellows. And what I'm trying to do is blend this a little bit better with this leaf over here as best I can, but not necessarily working out here. And, you know, again, trial and error, that's fine. But I do think that this is working pretty good, at least for in my opinion. I think that this is working pretty good. But it's always important to turn them off and turn them back on. And this is a very subtle adjustment, but it was something that I seen and I said, you know what, I really want to fix that. All right. So now that we have that, we can turn on our tone enhancer again. Now, mind you, it's using the curve module down here. So we still have everything going on over here. Now, in my opinion, this is just way too strong for my taste. All right. I like the faded look, but maybe not so much in that direction. So you can just pull the opacity down. And now I'm starting to get like this faded look that still retains a lot of really good information in the greens. And again, just my personal taste, yours may be different. And I think that this works really, really well. Now, what I do want to do is remove this a little bit from the highlights. In order to do that, what you're going to do is click on the gear icon to the tone enhancer. And then all I have to do is come down here where it says highlights and just pull this away until I feel like the brightest areas are kind of untouched by that faded look. The reason I do this is I like to have that edge in my image, that pop. If I start to take away too much of the highlights, because again, Remember in the develop module, and I'm sorry I didn't explain this. In the develop module, I increased the highlights and the whites specifically on this image. If I start to fade those, in my opinion, for my photo style, it just looks very flat in this area. And that's not what I want to go for, right? I want this to be a little bit more pure. I don't know exactly what number I had this at. Numbers are irrelevant as long as the photo looks the way you want it to, right? So, moral of the story, I like to remove a little bit of my highlights when I fade an image. And, it doesn't happen all the time, but I think it definitely was necessary on this image. All right. So now that I have like my base edit, right? Notice my workflow is I get my develop set, and then I go into my tone and saturation edits. Now I'm going to do more of the creative effects, which is going to be enhancing this light over here because the direction of light is coming this way. And we'll try a few different options here. I think the first one that I'm going to try is by adding in, okay. I think the first one that I'm going to try is by adding in a, let's see here. We'll go with sunshine because, it's sun. Why not? This may not work the way that I want it to, so bear with me. I'm going to increase this, and sadly, I have to make this look awful to make it look good, or at least better, I'll say. And then I'll even throw in a little bit of glow, right? I think that's cool. Okay, so now I have this over the entire image, and I don't care to have it over the entire image. I'm going to use a gradient tool that I don't use as often. I hit the letter M to get my masking bug, and then I am going to click on, it's actually over here. See, I don't use it that often that I have to remember where it's at. I'm going to use a reflected gradient, and I'm just going to click right here, and I'm going to rotate this around, and I need to invert this because I want the effect to happen on the inside of where I'm working. So hit the letter M again so I can get back to my tool so I can make my adjustments here. And what I'm trying to do is just make like this nice subtle sunlight beam of light shine right down the center here. And I may even need to narrow this a little bit more. It's okay if the fall off happens down here because it starts to get darker down there. When you make an edit, as long as it makes sense to the photo, you don't have to be exactly precise because light itself isn't very precise, right? It just kind of spreads and it hits what it hits and it doesn't what it doesn't. So now that we have this on here, let me just turn it off and on, see. So I think it's a little too strong. So we're just going to back down the opacity. And I also think that it's coming to the bottom right of the image a little too much. So I want to stop it down here. The way that I'm going to do that is just by hitting the letter B and grabbing my brush. And as you can see, I have my paint out. So all I have to do is paint out. And this is the beauty of working with ON1 with the letter O, just so I know that I'm painting out everything that I don't want in the image. Looking there, we'll hit O again, and let's see how well that worked. Hit O. Okay, so that's getting a little bit better. All right, just a little bit. We're going to go ahead and copy this mask because what I think we can do is really make that light stand out a little bit more by darkening everything else around it and then removing it from the brightest areas, again, protecting those highlights. So the way that we'll go about this in this particular case is taking the tone enhancer And then I'm just going to paste this mask, and I am going to invert this because the effect that I want to apply is going to be everywhere that that light isn't. And what I'm going to do is pull down on the exposure just a touch, and you see that we're starting to get that look of the light just barely kissing the leaf. And that's kind of what I was going for, right? Now I can go to the extreme, and I don't think that that looks very good. I feel like this one needs to be subtle. And in fact, I'm going to feather this mask a little bit more. And then we're going to come to this settings icon, and we're going to remove this from the highlights because I don't want this to impact those highlights. In fact, I'm going to pull it all the way up almost because I think that that is the better solution here. So let's go ahead and hit the before and after. And you see now we're starting to squeeze in a little bit. I don't know if you can see my hands in this little bubble, but we're starting to squeeze in a little bit more on this image and really focus that light where, or at least where I want it to be. And I'm okay with the light in the background here. I think that that adds a little bit of character. So without over processing this image and making this live stream excessively long, the last thing that I'll do here is add a border. And that's just because I think that this deserves a border. That's just my opinion. So we're going to go ahead and add a border. There we go. All right. Now, if you've been watching any of my content, you know that I'm not a big fan of this super huge border. I like to dial my borders back. So we'll scale this down, usually around 8. Sometimes I even go to 9. Just depends on the image. And I think 9 actually fits this image well. I think that it gives the attention that this photo needs, especially with all of the black that's going on around here. Now, what I am noticing is now that I'm looking at it with the border, right, is there's some things around the edges that can be cleaned up. So what I like to do for that is just go to local adjustment, and we're just going to clean this up real quick. So using a brush with paint in, I like to lower the, I apologize, had to clear my throat. I like to lower the exposure in the areas that are distractions. I could use the clone stamp and paint them out, but I think that works appropriately. Like, that looks good to me, at least in this particular edit. So I'll click here to get rid of that, click there. And it's okay if they're kind of showing. The goal is really just to mute that area. Now, I will say you should be a little careful. Like this little blurry drag, right? I'm going to paint this out, and I think this will work just fine. And to mention, or I didn't mention, my brush is at 100% opacity with a feather of 100% as well. So I'm not going to, if I happen to paint over something, it's not going to damage the image or the areas around the image. And now I'm just doing a lot of cleanup work here. But yeah, I think that works out well. So I'll turn this off and on so you can kind of see what happens. If you look in the lower right-hand section of the image, you can see that there's just these bright distractions that are happening, even in the upper right-hand corner. But as soon as I turn this exposure adjustment back on, you'll see that it starts to really tighten up the image and make the focus go where I need it to go. And I mentioned earlier that I was going to use a vignette. I don't think this image needs a vignette now. Now that I've added the border and I'm looking at the background here, I think that, you know, you don't look over here because there's nothing. You don't look here. You don't look there. You'll look right in the line of light. So that is that. Let me go ahead and make this a full screen just so I can share the final image with you. And then I will change my camera. Sorry, all these buttons. There we go. So now you're looking at the full screen version. And get this brush out of the way because no one wants to see the brush. We'll just put the brush right there. Now you're looking at a full screen version of the final image. This is the before with none of the edits. You can see it was very busy, and we turned this into something that's a little bit more peaceful and easier to digest for the viewer. So that is that. Now, I hope you found value in this particular live stream, and I look forward to bringing more of them and, you know, just sharing how I go through my editing process and answering any questions. So if you guys have questions, drop them in the comments section. And if not, that's okay. I hope you found value in this particular walkthrough and just hearing my thoughts on what I like to do with my image. Now, if you want to connect with me, I use Vero to publish a lot of the work that I do inside of ON1. You can catch me at Free Will Photos over on Vero, and that information will be down in the description box. It's not there right this second, so I will type in my Vero handle in the chat. Oh, Hans, thanks, man. I appreciate you joining in this morning, and thank you. So if you want to catch me on Vero, the at Free Will Photos is in the chat. If you're watching this on the replay, it'll be in the description box at that point. And I'd love to connect with you over there. So until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.